This is going to be a great conversation. I've been waiting for this. We're going to talk about the brain and the relationship to pressure. Maybe we start off with just helping us understand, leadership is about high stakes, big decisions. What's happening in our brain when we are dealing with pressure?
Well, the first thing that's happening in our brain is we have a threat. We're detecting a threat, right? That pressure is a threat. And so parts of our brain are going off that are detecting those threats and then rerouting systems, like our sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight or freeze system, not the parasympathetic system, which is the rest and digest and calming system.
Leadership looks powerful from the outside, but behind closed doors, the pressure is real. The decisions are heavy, and most leaders have nowhere to talk about it. The boardroom moments that keep you up at night, the decisions that affect thousands of people, the quiet questions many leaders carry but rarely say out loud. I'm Melissa Dawn Simkins, EdTech founder of Athleadership, CEO of Velvet Suite, and the C-Suite confidant to leaders performing at their highest level as they navigate pressure and change. For more than 2 decades, I've built global leadership platforms and advised executives and elite performers across business and sport in high-stakes environments. If you're here, you're probably someone people count on. That's why I created C-Suite Confidential. Grounded in neuroscience and the elite athletic mindset, each episode features candid conversations with CEOs, talent leaders, athletes, high performers who understand both demands and the privilege of leadership. Most leadership conversations focus on strategy. This one focuses on conditioning. If you're leading in the arena and you want to do it with strength, clarity, and heart, you are in the right place. This is C-Suite Confidential, where leaders come to strengthen the mindset required to perform when it matters most.
Welcome to C-Suite Confidential. I'm your host, Melissa Dawn Simkins, founder of Athleadership and CEO of Velvet Suite. In the arena today, we have Dr. Michael Mannino. He is co-founder of Synergy AI and the Chief Science Officer for Flow Research Collective. Not only is he an executive, he's also an amateur athlete, a neuroscientist, someone who really understands the dynamics of behavior and how we operate from a neurological perspective under stress. And so in today's episode, we are breaking down the elite athletic mindset. What can we learn from athletes who have performed well under stress, urgency, and pressure, which ultimately elevates their value? And how, as leaders, we can apply that mindset and condition our way to being stronger leaders under pressure, having a stronger foundation to build for our teams, and ultimately getting all of us in flow. So you're not going to want to miss this episode. Let's get into it. Dr. Mannino, how are you today?
Very good, Melissa. Happy to be here with you. Thank you.
This is going to be a great conversation. I've been waiting for this. We're going to talk about the brain and the relationship to pressure. Maybe we start off with just helping us understand, leadership is about high stakes, big decisions. What's happening in our brain when we are dealing with pressure?
Well, the first thing that's happening in our brain is we have a threat. We're detecting a threat, right? That pressure is a threat. And so parts of our brain are going off that are detecting those threats and then rerouting systems, like our sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight or freeze system, not the parasympathetic system, which is the rest and digest and calming system. And these two systems kind of work in balance and it's sort of a teeter-totter. But in our brains are detecting a threat and raising cortisol levels. And the hypothalamus is firing off systems to pay more attention and to reduce our cognitive flexibility, keep our attention focused. And that if that's not trained in the right way, and that all of these things that we're going to be talking about, then that can lead to bad decision making, emotional dysregulation, even PTSD and trauma as well.
There's so much to unpack here because what I take from that and our audience can take from that, there's so much is happening behind the scenes. And it's more than what we know. It's more than what we know that is in dictating our decisions. It's what we've um, been built to prepare to lead through these moments of change. Why we talk a lot about leaders aren't born, they're built. And what does that building process look like in terms of regulation in our brain?
In terms of regulation in our brain, and actually one of the biggest things that actually happens in our brains is the HPA axis, which is the sorry, let me get this right, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. That's the HPA axis, and it's really involved in stress regulation and especially in pressure moments. And if there's too much chronic activation of stress, that can really dysregulate the HPA axis, and that can throw off all kinds of systems. It can even affect our immune system, so we get sick more often. And even autoimmune responses can be triggered by HPA dysregulation, and with too much chronic stress, too much pressure, too often, too much of the time, that kind of thing. But when we say leaders are conditioned and cultivated, and leadership is a quality that's cultivated, I mean, it's associated with certain personality traits, just like flow. The flow state in psychology, and we'll talk about that, is also associated with some personality traits. But in general, it's something that can be conditioned, just like elite athletes conditioning their bodies and minds for those high stakes scenarios. So I think,
Yes.
yeah, there's a little bit of nature nurture to it. But in terms of conditioning, repeated exposure under pressure can rewire neuroplasticity in the brain, sort of predictable responses. And this is like this phrase that we're using: you need to get your reps in.
Mhm.
You need to get your reps in for nervous system adaptation. And that's something that is trainable. That's what athletes do. That's what leaders should be doing as well. So yes, personality traits, we're born with certain things, internal, systems, but nervous system adaptation, and training that. A quote comes to mind from William James, who is an American psychologist. This quote is often floated around. Stephen Kotler, my friend and colleague, loves to say it as well, that you need to make your nervous system your ally instead of your enemy. And that's really what nervous system conditioning is all about. That's what athletes do.
It's fascinating to me because when you study the athlete, and we've talked about this in this leadership approach, this elite athletic mindset, is that why athletes get paid so much is
Mhm.
not because they know how to throw a ball. It's because they know how to throw a ball with 10 seconds down and with the defender in their face. Like it's the
Yeah.
pressure, it's the moment
Yeah.
that they can show up. And I think leadership in this moment is having to be reframed because it's no longer pressure is an event, it's the environment, it's always around us. So, how do leaders listen to our show, our audience, begin to get their reps in? What are things that they can do when they feel that stress coming in their nervous system and their, amygdala's up? Like, what are the things they can do to start conditioning themselves for these moments?
Great. Yeah. So, well, start taking a page from the elite athlete's book, and athletes also have a great support system. So I will start there. Leadership is not a single person thing. You don't do it alone. You do it. You lead teams. Leaders lead teams, right? Leaders we are social creatures, so you don't do it alone. And having a strong support system, social aspects of that, social components in play. Even tennis players, right, who just are on the court themselves, it's an individual sport, have a team, with them, that they always thank after winning and or losing, right? They thank their team. That's the first thing they pretty much thank. So that's one. I would say one of the biggest things, going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of nervous system adaptation, is doing things to increase your stress tolerance, to increase your resilience. stress inoculation and exposure. So in neuroscience, in performance neuroscience, we call this hormesis, HORMESIS. And there are things called hormetic stressors. These are small stressors in the right context, in the with the right mindset, that can actually increase our ceiling for our ability to tolerate more levels of stress, higher levels of stress. That's called hormesis. And so you want to, small exposing yourself to pressure environments. That's getting your reps in. And we can do this in a controlled environment, and that's very, very helpful. So things like fasting in the right context. And by the way, so I'll talk about this in a second. My brain's firing here on all cylinders. Sauna, cold exposure, different kinds of breath work. So one of the most powerful things here, and this is a physiological, that's what we're talking about, right? Physiological adaptation changes to get your body, which then gets your cognition and your mind and your psychology right for these high stakes scenarios and decision-making, scenarios, is like something called CO2 tolerance. So carbon dioxide tolerance. And so it's been shown because when we are holding our breath, and the CO2 in our bodies starts to rise, and we start to panic. And if you've ever felt that, it's a very uncomfortable thing. And doing breath holds is actually really something very interesting. To grab control of your breath can help you gain control, a top-down control, to be calmer in those scenarios. Because you're building up your CO2 tolerance, because those parts of your panic, when you panic and you're losing your when you panic while you're holding your breath, that's connected directly to the amygdala, and that's also directly connected to parts of your prefrontal cortex. So this is well-studied phenomenon. So those kinds of things can build up slowly your stress tolerance and your stress threshold. Another thing is this, and this is more cognitive, is when we talk about emotional regulation. So there's different kinds of stress. There's eustress and distress. And eustress is a good stress. And in fact, we see that in performance science. There's a Goldilocks zone of the right amount of stress, the right kind of stress, the eustress, that is correlated with optimal performance. Looks like an inverted U curve. So over here, not enough stress, not good performance. Over here on the other side, a lot of stress, too much stress, too often, performance is not good. It's low. Performance is high at the top of the curve, right? It's called the Yerkes in science, by the way. So that's what I meant by the right kind of stress in the right context, with the right kind of mindset, the right kind of cognitive reframe.
Yes.
By the way, that's another cognitive reframing is this technique, is another technique that athletes do all the time, that leaders can start to do. It's you're reframing your perceived stress you're making it from a distress to a eustress. You're saying things like, I don't have to do this. I get to do this. In fact, one of the biggest cognitive reframes, in fact, in tennis, in the French Open, I believe, or maybe in the Arthur Ashe Stadium in the U.S. Open, that is like the ultimate cognitive reframe. You're reframing pressure from something, oh my God, like I have to go through this. No. You get to do this. This is a privilege.
You get to do this.
And when you do that, when you actually internalize that cognitive reframe, you see physiological and neurobiological changes. And through neuroplasticity, that's something that you can actually train yourself to just completely internalize.
I'm smiling here because I'm thinking about when I competed in my first fitness competition, and I had a very rigorous training schedule. And one of the things I would tell myself, Michael, is my last phase of my training, I looked at as dessert. And I would say, oh, I get to go do dessert, right? Because I had a sweet tooth, but that was me reframing that training experience so that I could then see myself accomplish a goal. And so it's
Amazing.
so true. It's so true. I love this stuff. This is awesome. Talk to us about our audience. So say they hear you, they understand the U curve, good, bad, stress, too much. Give some examples. Too little, too much. Give some examples of how that could play out in a day. What would be like too little? What would be too much?
What would be too little? I mean, if the thing that you're doing, the task that you're engaged in, whether that's maybe from mundane tasks like I don't know, driving to work or washing the dishes or something like that, to these other parts of the day where you're giving a public presentation or you're in the boardroom or you're teaching a class or your 5-year-old daughter is acting up or something like that. Those are stressful moments, too stressful moments versus too little. And the idea is that and in flow science and in flow state, we call this the challenge skills balance. So if the and this is one of the biggest flow triggers that gets people into athletes or leaders or whatever in flow, which is this optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and we're performing our best, or we're totally immersed in the situation at hand and the task that we're doing. We forget other things. So when the challenge of the activity is too low and your skill set or your capacity to do the thing that you're doing is too high, then you're going to be bored. There's going to be boredom, right? That's the idea of in this inverted U curve. Too little stress. Your parasympathetic nervous system is upregulated, so you're too calm, right? And performance dips there, right? Performance dips. So we need the right amount of stress. That's the whole point there. And then in these other scenarios where the challenge is too great and your skill set, let's say, is too low, then there's frustration and anxiety. And if it's either really challenging, that can lead to like trauma and the PTSD. We write about this in our in some work that we've actually published. So Stephen Kotler, who is on this, does this research with me, he has this phrase in one of his books, The Art of Impossible. He says, "Flow starts when you say yes to the fight." And I love that quote. So that's sort of kind of getting back to your question here, is approach versus avoidance. So when we're in these situations and we can cultivate this ability to lean in and approach versus avoid, our nervous system goes different paths. And it can go into flow, or it can go into frustration. It can go into high performance, or it can go into burnout, and so on, or even trauma, right? Or PTSD or something like that. And so the nervous system, there's the cascade of events that happens in our nervous systems that will lead to one of these outcomes, either high performance and flow state and enjoyment and so on, versus frustration, anxiety, burnout, and so on.
What I hear you saying in all of this, which is so fascinating, but actually so practical, is that it's a choice. We have the agency to choose how we move through this life and how we activate our neurological system, our nervous system to be our partner for performance, right? Versus our enemy. That's what you just said.
Yeah, exactly. It's totally a choice. The biggest insight through all of this science, I would say, which is, it's tricky, it's a double-edged sword, is that the science all says it's trainable and actionable and practically applied and so on, which is so phenomenal. Like, that's why I love studying this field, is because we can take the science out of the lab and apply it in our daily lives to become better people and better leaders and better athletes and so on. But that also means it's sort of it's so obvious that and behavior change is such a difficult thing in humans. um, Building habits, breaking habits, these kinds of things. People have written books and there's a whole field of it. But that's why it's a double-edged sword, because it's really hard to practice what you preach a lot of the time, right?
Yes,
So
it is. I was talking with an executive this week actually, and we were talking about the elite athletic mindset. And he works in sports, and he says, Melissa, everybody doesn't want to do this work. Everybody doesn't want to do the work. And I said, I agree, but I think part of the opportunity we have is the difference between training versus conditioning, because I do believe there's a difference, and conditioning, I believe, gives people an on ramp to practice in real time and become more comfortable with the uncomfortable. Maybe explain to our audience what you think is the difference between training and conditioning.
I think training is more of like an intellectual process, a learning process. Um, More of, I was just thinking of something, an intellectual process, a learning process. Training is more of like knowledge based, I kind of think, whereas conditioning is more of like doing, um, rather than being or learning. Conditioning is doing. Conditioning is practicing. Conditioning is like real world. So like I'm an amateur athlete and I do a lot of calisthenics and hand balancing and stuff like that. And so training, you're so here's the difference. Training is you're actually doing the skill. So I'll give you an example, personal example. I'm doing a lot of hand balancing and handstands. That's what I love to do. A very difficult, very long journey.
Very, a
And I
lot of patience to do that, I would
lot of
imagine. A lot of
lot of
patience.
patience because it's a very non-linear process, and you're like, oh my god, I'm making so much progress this one session. Then the next day it's like I'm starting from day one. I feel like what is happening? What Because it's a neural skill. It's not right. It's not like a muscular hypertrophy thing. It's a neuromuscular skill. It's really a neural skill, and that takes a while to train because that's just how biologically speaking, brain cells, neural cells work.
Such a
That's
great
why,
example. I love
yeah,
this. This is such a good example.
it is directly applicable and extrapolation to leadership and decision making and so on. But training is so I'm training for the one arm handstand. I'm training for the one arm handstand, and like I'll in a session training for it is doing the thing, doing the skill, doing the one arm handstand, um, getting up there, lifting off one arm, doing that. Conditioning, which is so necessary. All my hand balancing coaches, all the best people, it's they're all on their Instagram reels and so on. It's you see them talking about conditioning, which means you're doing the drills. You're not doing the skill itself. You're not training that skill. You're doing the drills around it to strengthen your compression, strengthen your muscles. You're building up you're conditioning those things that surround the actual skill to be
Yeah.
able then when you start training it to do it better and make progress on it. So it's conditioning. Same thing, and I
So
think what we're talking about.
so powerful, because that's not the way leadership's been built. Leadership's been built on training. And there hasn't been a real practice around how do you condition for these real high stakes moments before you're in.
Exactly. And then also all the workshops. I've talked to so many clients along the way and people and colleagues. They're going to this 3-day workshop at Harvard, which is great. Like, they're going to, they're taking this course, and so on. And all of those are great for training and learning skills and building up skill sets and things like that. But yeah, conditioning is real world application, getting the
Yeah.
reps in, doing the drills, practicing your recovery, baking that in, like all of these things, right? So
Yes, yes. I
that's
say common knowledge is not common practice. And it's like that's the
great.
the knowledge is one thing, it's the practice is the other. And that's where we have a gap. But it's the good news is people like you, leaders like you who are really breaking down this neurological experience and giving us the tools and then also showing us how we can move and flow in our life. I think as leaders, we need to first own that. And then how do we help others in our circle? So like if you could say, I'm gonna ask you this question. And if a leader has 60 seconds before a high stakes decision, what is one neurological reset they could use immediately?
That has to be the ability to grab control of your breath and slow down your exhale.
60 seconds. So the box breath, is that an example? Or what would you say? Like, how would
Yeah.
you
That's a short time scale. So all of these breathing techniques are so powerful for changing the plasticity in your brain and retraining your physiology to be able to handle those moments offline. I think there's great techniques out there that give you the ability to be more aware of your body. And when you're more aware of your body, in neuroscience, there's and I'll get back to the 60-second technique. But in neuroscience, there's something called the vagus nerve in our body, and in neuroscience, the vagus nerve is a very well studied nerve. It's the 10th cranial nerve, and it's the nerve that is calming, safety, resting, and recovery. And so it's the 10th cranial nerve, and it goes from the brainstem all the way down. 80% of the fibers actually go from the body to the brain. 20% of the fibers go from the brain to the body. And the vagus nerve is it's so important for mental health, mental well-being, people with higher vagal tone. That is your baseline activity of your vagus nerve, how it's just firing on a daily basis. People with a higher vagal tone, better recovery, better sleep, better emotional regulation. The list goes on and on and on. It's a really well-studied nerve, and especially in performance neuroscience. And so what you want to do in those 60 seconds or those high-stakes scenarios is just grab a hold of your vagus nerve and upregulate it, get it firing. Because if you do, it's going to calm things down. And that's going to...
How do you do that? How do you do that?
You do that with exhalation.
Okay.
You do that with long exhalation. And so that's why I'm saying if you have 60 seconds right before a speech, or right before you walk in the boardroom, or right before you walk on court, or whatever, for the most part, excuse me, people want to slow down your exhale, take a breath in, and just long exhale, either through pursed lips, like, or through your nose. But just slowing down that exhale will upregulate your vagal activity, and your brain will say, hey, my body's actually calm. I can do this. You throw in a little visualization and a little bit of self-talk while you're doing that, you're amplifying that response even more.
Yes. Yes. I love it. I love it. I love it. So before you've given us so many great insights. Before we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about your research and share with us a little bit about how your research is really applicable to what we're talking about today.
I have two aspects of my research. One of them is both of them are very, very directly applicable to what we're talking about today. The first one is for flow state and what happens in the brain and the body during flow. We've just done a bunch of research on the psychophysiology of flow. So that's your heart rate and your brain waves and all of these other biomarkers that we have, that the human body and brain has that are indicative of flow. One aspect that we did, one study that we showed, we looked at tolerance in exercise. Some people are high tolerant in their exercise, and some people are a little bit more low tolerant in that they don't like physical distress and physical fitness and doing hard things, and exercise is exhausting and trying to get motivated. And some people are very high tolerant, right? And we actually showed that that's not really about physical fitness. It's actually a brain issue. It's a brain regulation issue. Actually, people's brains are organized differently in high tolerant individuals versus low tolerant individuals. And so it's something that's also trainable as well. You can learn to build up your tolerance to be able to do harder things, and especially when it comes to like physical fitness and exercise. Same thing happens though in real world. So a lot of the research is in flow. And then the other prong of my research is in team flow and team performance. And a lot of that research, team flow is a team in flow. It's an
Yes.
optimal state of team consciousness where the team is acting like one unified organism with a collective ambition, a shared goals. Skills are integrated very well. There's open communication, and in fact, it turns out that there's a mechanism, biologically speaking, that facilitates team performance. And that's this idea of human synchrony, team synchrony,
Mm.
interpersonal synchrony. And so synchrony is when we get in sync. And we have language for this all the time. We're on the same wavelength. We have team chemistry. We're clicking. All of
On the
those
same page. Yeah.
on the same page. So it turns out there's a real biological measurement to this. Our brain waves, our brains actually get in sync. Our heartbeats get in sync. All of these other things get in sync too, like our skin, galvanic skin response. All of these things get into sync, and it's a strong predictor. Synchrony is a strong predictor of better team performance, communication, human collaboration. Teams that are in sync biologically make better decisions. They make fewer errors, actually, in problem solving tasks. And humans get in sync all the time, in many different scenarios, right? But in teams, there's also this idea of team synchrony, and some of our research has shown that team synchrony um, is a strong predictor of like psychological safety and trust and just better team performance. So I have a project that we've launched, as you know, a company that uses artificial intelligence actually to measure that team synchrony and nudge it, give recommendations, give teams activities to increase their communication and empathy and psychological safety and engagement.
Yes. This is such a exciting frontier because, again, as you're an AI expert as well, you're applying that in a way that enables teams to perform better together. But it all starts with our brain. It starts with our connection to self, and then how we lead others, which is huge.
That's all, and I'll make a recommendation of a book from my colleague Michael Platt up at University of Pennsylvania at Wharton Neuroscience Institute. He wrote a book called The Leader's Brain, and
Yes.
it's a great book. And all the first two chapters are all about team flow and team synchrony, and because the leader's brain is he says there's a phrase in neuroscience: neurons that fire together wire together. That's just this idea of neuroplasticity. But he has this phrase that brains that fire together wire together as well. And so leaders, like back to the thing that we were saying in the first part of this conversation, is that it's a social enterprise. Leadership is a social thing. You're leading teams, and that there's a biology to that as well.
There is. And I think what I take from this conversation is that there's a great opportunity for all of us to apply leadership in a real way that we can condition ourselves. If we're not where we want to be, if we're recognizing our triggers, we have the ability to make those changes if we apply and condition ourselves to think differently as leaders.
Yes, 100% agree with you. And I think that's why knowing some of this science and that people are studying this, and now we're studying this connection between athletics, what's neuroathletics and neuroleadership, and
Yes.
which is so phenomenal. Which we see those fields are not converging on their results, and like there's a whole field called
Talk a little bit about that because I don't know
yeah,
that audience fully understands how breakthrough the elite athletic mindset is because
yeah.
that's not currently in the discussion.
Yes, so there's a whole field now called sports neuroscience, like sports psychology, and we there's a field called performance psychology. But now we've published a textbook, really the first of its kind, on performance neuroscience. So in sports neuroscience, they're looking at what goes on in the brains of elite athletes and people who play sports and and so on, because it's directly applicable to performance. And then there's this other field called neuroleadership, which I was just talking about with Michael Platt in his work up at Wharton Neuroscience at UPenn. It's about what goes on in the brains of leaders, Are their decision-making processes at the level of the brain different? Are their ability to regulate their emotions at the level of the brain different than the rest of us folks?
Yeah.
Let's just and it turns out there is, and it also turns out that there's a commonality in the brains of elite athletes and the brains of leaders.
Yes.
And
So that's
it's,
where we see leadership kind of sits in that unique space.
yeah, that intersection, that overlap. And so it's fascinating just from a scientific point of view, but it's also really interesting from an applied, as you were saying too, like a practical application point of view, that we can say, hey, if you want to really cultivate these techniques and strategies and habits as a leader, you can take a page from what goes on in the brains of elite athletes and start training and conditioning like that.
Yeah. There's so much to uncover. Dr. Mannino, it's been a privilege to have you on. Exciting
Thank
work
you.
that you're doing with Synergy AI. I want to continue to follow
Thank
that
you.
work. I'm
Yes.
excited about what we're doing together with Athleadership. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. A fun conversation as always. Great work, Melissa.
Thanks for joining us on C-Suite Confidential. Every episode is designed to help you condition your leadership for pressure, performance, and long-term impact. If today's conversation resonated, be sure to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you never miss an episode. For more insights on Athleadership, where elite athletic mindset meets next-level leadership conditioning, visit athleadershiparena.com. Until next time, remember, leaders aren't born, they're built. You've got this.